I'm under no illusion that I'm under no illusions, and I must have lots of problems because I've got all these solutions, but the problems replicate every time that I resolve them. If there's no problems, only thought, and the I mind that revolves them, maybe I could drop the thought of me and any need to solve them, and remembering forgetting collapses and dissolves them. Hello, hello, hello. It is 3:56 on Sunday, the 11th of December. I am the Wolfman, and I hope you know who you are. Um, Before I get into the content of today's message, I would like to start with a public service announcement. It is okay, it is okay, it is okay to express joy in public. If you've got a song in your heart, then let it out your lips. If you've got a dance in your bones, then let it out your hips. And if you've got a woo in you, let your woo come through. And woo! Don't hold that woo inside. You don't have to be on crazy, and you don't have to be drugs to be happy in public. We do often. We look at somebody who's dancing in the street or who's singing, walking down the sidewalk, and we go, oh, look, it's a crackhead. And granted, it usually is a crackhead, but it might just be somebody having a good time. And furthermore, how come all the people that aren't on crack aren't dancing in the street and aren't singing as they walk down the sidewalk? Be happy in public, smile, laugh if you want to. If you want to. I'm not telling you that you have to smile or you have to laugh. If you don't feel like smiling or laughing, certainly don't. But if you do feel like smiling or laughing in public, then you've got the Wolfman rubber stamp of approval to express joy in public, and that's just how I wanted to start this video. The video itself, however, is meant to be about this sort of concept that I've got rolling around in my head that I'm starting to define, that I haven't really figured out exactly what it is, but it has to do with this idea of control. Dominance, submission, the radiance of fear. No, just control and surrender and higher powers, channeling. All of these things sort of come into this idea that I've got bouncing around in my head, and I think, well, I've done this. I've recorded half of this video already once, but then I got the little notification that said I was out of storage because apparently I have a trash folder where all my videos go to wait 30 days before they are truly deleted. And so I did not realize that, and I had to delete because I don't have good editing software. And if I don't get it all in one take, then I start over. There is no editing for the Wolfman. This all has to happen in the same take. And so I had to start over at about 16 minutes in, which is probably fortunate if you like things to be cognizant, cogent. If it was written, I would say legible. Intelligible is the word, because the idea had been to sort of develop this idea live on camera, and so I did actually successfully develop the idea a little bit, and I got through some of it, so hopefully, with any luck, and I'm very lucky, this will go a bit more smoothly than it did the first time, and you will be the benefactor of that rehearsal, that sort of drill that we did earlier. So, control. The first thought that I have about control is there any? Is there any control? Are you in control of your thoughts, your emotions, your actions, and the things that happen in your life? And to this, the loose answer I have is yes. Now, let's start with actions. You are certainly, let's not go with you. Let's go with me. Let me use some powerful language. Let me speak from my vantage point, and then you can determine whether or not you think that it applies to you. And so I will say that I certainly am in control of my actions. However, it is certainly true that there have been times when I have been so angry that I have taken an action that did not feel like I was under control of it, felt involuntary. There have been times when I have cramped and my muscles have contracted involuntarily. There have been times when I have been startled and jumped, and again, involuntary motion. So there is even a limit to how much control I have over my own actions. It is possible for me to act involuntarily. Um, Now, then the second thing to consider um, is emotion. Which, let me go on a little rabbit trail first and say that thoughts, emotions, and actions are not actually separate from each other. They're all one sort of thing, but it is helpful for us to conceptually separate them. But the way we act and the way we feel and the way we think are all one sort of thing. But you can look at it. You can look at it from these different perspectives. So that's what we're going to do. But it is useful to remember that there are no real separations in reality. There are no true separations. Heat bleeds over through everything. You know, you piss in the pool, you piss in the whole pool. There's no separation. Um, and so it is with thoughts and feelings and emotions, that they're all sort of one thing, but you can pick the snake up by the head or by the tail or by the middle. And in this case, we're going to do that. We're going to pick it up by these different parts, and we're going to look at the emotions. And so I do believe that with enough practice, whether that be acting lessons or sales classes or psychology or meditation or whatever it is, with enough practice, I do believe you can control your emotions, and you can intend to feel a certain way, and you can summon that feeling up within yourself, whether it be anger. Certainly, if you have been in combat sports or even like football or whatever, it's not uncommon to sort of like psych yourself up and to sort of feel an aggressive type of sort of anger. Um, you don't want to be so angry that you can't control yourself, but certainly it gives you a little bit of an edge to like summon a bit of that. Um, people before they get up on stage will psych themselves up. People will calm themselves down on purpose. People will be happy on purpose. I think that happiness and peace, um, not like exuberance and excitement and everything, but like a peaceful sort of happiness, is the natural state of the human spirit. Um, but you can stop doing the things that take your happiness and your peace away, and you can allow yourself to be happy. And so, is control really the right word for emotions? Maybe not. Maybe it's more like influence, but it does seem possible to do it intentionally. And even if you haven't developed that skill of feeling things on purpose, it seems that you can influence how you will feel by the way you look at the things that happen. Um, so something happens, it's raining outside, and you go, "Oh, it's raining. Great, we needed that." That's a thought that you can have on purpose, which we'll get into a little bit more. See, thoughts and feelings, they're part of the same thing. Or you can say, "Oh, it's raining. Now I can't go outside and do the things that I wanted to do." And these are both stories about the same thing, but they feel very different. And so by changing your story, you can certainly change the way you feel about the things that happen. Um, so if you're not some kind of an emotional master that can just summon up whatever feeling you want at any time for no reason, it is still possible to change the things you focus on and the way you look at the things that you see in order to feel different ways. So do you have control over your emotions? Sure, that might not be the best way to say it, but loosely, yes. And then do you have control over your thoughts? Now, I have spent a lot of time meditating, and I have found that there are such things as intrusive thoughts. However, if you get quiet enough and if you slow down enough, you can control this. You can stop thinking altogether. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but it is a skill that you can develop. And you can also think things on purpose. Now, it's very difficult to explain how to think a thought on purpose without already thinking it. And so it's really something that you're just going to have to discover for yourself, or find a better teacher, because I can't explain it to you. But it does, I will tell you that it does seem to be possible to think thoughts on purpose, and to sort of see the thoughts before you think them and then think them. And if not, it's certainly possible to like think two things. Well, maybe it's this or maybe it's this. And so maybe you didn't have control over the two things that you thought, but it is possible to select the better one. You can think, that son of a bitch knew that I wanted that parking space and he rushed in to take it. And you think, or maybe he's just not that good at driving and not that self-aware, or not self-aware, but aware of his surroundings. And maybe he didn't even notice me at all. And then you'd be like, you know what? It feels a lot better to think the second thing. I will think that. And you can repeat your thoughts. And yes, if you let things get out of control, then they start to feel like they're out of control. But if you take control of them, then it starts to feel like you have control of them. It's crazy how that works. So that sort of touches the whole free will aspect and where I land on it. But I think more importantly, is it control? Because it seems to me that the word control implies two separate things. Like if you control the flow of, say, water, you use a spigot to do that, and you do that by tightening or loosening the thing and opening or closing the end that the water can come out of. And so that in this example, it takes somebody to control something else. And but then people will tell you to control yourself, and that doesn't really make sense. Why would you need to control yourself? So you separate yourself from yourself in order to tell yourself what to do and to make sure that you do the thing that you want you to do. Why don't you just do it? Like, what? What is this whole idea of controlling yourself? It seems like we hear this from a young age, and so we don't necessarily think about it. You don't need to control yourself. You can do things on purpose. And maybe you hear this and you go, well, duh, that's what I mean when I say control myself, is that I do things on purpose. Okay, well, that's not what the words you're using mean, though. To control yourself can you hear the difference? Maybe I'm crazy. Can you hear the difference between the concept of just doing things on purpose or controlling yourself? Can you hear that subtle connotation where controlling yourself is sort of like there's this little part of yourself outside of yourself that's kind of trying to control the flow? Or you're just a flow that is doing what it wants on purpose, acting intentionally. So I think this idea of control is not a great concept, and so I keep asking spirit or my intuition or whatever for better words, because I really feel like the words we use are important and they change the way that we think. And so I ask, like, what is a better way to say it than control? And it seems like to do things on purpose. It's a little more wordy, right? But it does seem to be a little bit more accurate. So instead of, I'm controlling my foot, as if my foot is separate from me and I'm not part of it. As if it's like me controlling my car, that's one thing. But really, if you're a really good driver, what are they going to tell you? They're going to tell you to become, be the ball, right? Like, you people who are really good at using tools start to identify with the tool. Like, put my hammer in my hand, my 16-ounce ball peen, and I don't have to think about how to hit things with it. Like, it's just, that's how long my arm with a hammer is, and the hammer feels like a natural part of me. It doesn't feel separate from me, because I've been using the thing forever. So, like, really separating yourself from your tool conceptually. I know there's a joke there, but let's not make it. I don't know. We don't have time for humor. Um, he said to himself in front of a camera. Talking about separation, right? No, so yeah, you don't want to control yourself. You want to do things on purpose because you don't want to separate yourself from yourself. You don't even want to separate yourself from your tools. And there's a strong argument to be made that you are actually separate from your tools, although in a larger sense, I don't believe that there are any true separations in the universe. The universe is one thing, and there aren't any true separations in it. And this type of conceptualization of the universe seems to be much more useful than a universe full of 10,000 things, or an infinite number of things all bumping into each other. No, it's one universe. So there's no real separations in it, and you don't want to separate yourself from yourself, so you don't want to control yourself. You want to just be doing the thing that you're doing. So do you want to control your emotions and make yourself be happy, or with all of those extra steps, or do you want to just be happy on purpose? And so then it's like, oh, here's another step even further that you can go. Do you want to be happy, or can I just say be happy? Does there have to be a you to be happy, or can happiness just be? Can it just be happiness? Well, the English language tells us that every verb requires a noun for it to be a proper sentence. But that's just a language rule. That's not a reality rule. And so, you understood, right? Like we all learned in grade school. So you be happy. But in reality, the reason why it's be happy is because there's no you required. You don't have to have a concept of self. You can just be happy. And we can argue all day fruitlessly about whether or not there is a you that is being happy, but that's not important. It's not necessary to have a concept of self in order to be happy. In fact, I would argue that it is counterproductive to have a concept of self, and just to experience happiness being works much better. So, which brings me to my next point. Now, I don't know what you know about channels and channeling, but it seems like there's an increasing popularity of people who believe in a higher self. And this is an illusion, because the self itself is an illusion. In my opinion, the madman, the trickster, and the fool. But it's a useful illusion. And like a good magician is out there spinning illusions that dissolve the harmful illusions that are already out there. The advertisers at Coca-Cola are spinning illusions for you. And so when somebody comes along and spins an illusion of your higher self and tells you to ask that higher self whether or not you need a Coca-Cola, I'm not saying that they're liars or that they don't believe what they're selling, or that they are bad people or any of that. It seems to be actually, and it is a concept. It's a concept that I use. I think about the higher self a lot of times. But again, the reality, as far as I can tell, is that the universe is one thing. And so the self isn't even real. Your self isn't real. You eat, and the food becomes you, and then it stops being you and you poop it out. And if you try to figure out at what point the baked potato that you are eating has become you, and what point it has stopped being you, and you really take a look at what you are, you're a recognizable pattern. Okay? And oxygen comes in and oxygen goes out. It's not the same oxygen that you were born with, and it's not the same oxygen that you'll die with. And protein comes in and goes out, and glucose comes in and goes out, and water comes in and goes out. So, much easier way to conceptualize this would be just the elements. The air element comes in and goes out, and the water element comes in and goes out, and the earth element, in the form of all these proteins and glucose and vitamins and minerals and so on and so forth, comes in and goes out. And it's not the same stuff that you're made out of. You're made of different stuff than you were made out of a minute ago. And you're made out of completely different stuff than you were made out of 7 years ago. And the ideas come in and go out. And you don't even have the same ideas. Your personality has changed. Maybe subtly, maybe not very much. And it happens slowly enough that we can continue to recognize the pattern that has your name and that we call you. But like, your self is an illusion. That's a very convincing illusion. I feel like me. I feel like the same person that I was born being, but I'm not. I'm completely different. And yet, very much the same in a lot of ways. The pattern is recognizable. So, in this self is an illusion, and then we have this illusion of a higher self. And maybe it's a useful illusion. And this self is certainly a useful illusion, because if I didn't have the illusion of self, then nobody would know who to address my Christmas presents to, or my Christmas cards or whatever. Like, having a name for this pattern is a useful illusion, and we do many things as selves, and it seems to make society run in a fairly simplified way. It's not nearly as confusing, but it causes its own problems and things. So I'm not down on the concept of self. I'm just saying it's an illusion. But so's most things, and it's okay. What we live in is mostly stories and illusions, and that's okay. Like, that's fine. That's actually perfect. That's the way that it's meant to be. And sometimes it's useful. It's useful to realize that they're illusions, but if you're going to play the game, you've got to play it as if they're real. So you don't need to know that they're illusions in order to play the game. Game goes on just fine with everybody believing in these illusions. Okay, so if you don't know what a higher self is, a lot of people believe in this idea that before you're born, you have a soul or a higher self, maybe even the entire universe. It's this non-physical part of you that manifests as a little baby and grows and becomes the you that most people refer to as you. And that's your small self, your individual self. And then your higher self is this non-physical part of you, or your soul or whatever, that is divine and existed before you were born and continues to exist and will exist after you're dead. And so a lot of these people that channel, they sort of... Okay, so that's the concept. That's the concept, is that there's a higher self, and then there's the normally thought of, meat body, everyday self that you're going through life with. And so what they'll do is they will channel, and they will bring their higher self through, and they will try to be in alignment with the higher self, and they'll try to think, well, what does my higher self think about this? And it's great. It's a pretty useful tool of picking the best way to move through life. But here's what I think. I think that it's more of a spectrum. And so given that the self itself is already an illusion, so the higher self must be an illusion. There's no self. There's just one universe. But to the degree that there is a recognizable pattern that we can call the higher self, and a recognizable pattern that we can call you, or we can call me, I think a lot of time, I think that what it really is it's a spectrum between the normal, societally recognized self and the, quote, higher self. And so you've got your thinking mind, which is, let's say we've got your voice that speaks, like my voice that's speaking to you right now, saying all these words. making these sounds. And that is like the sort of end protrusion of yourself. Behind that, you've got the thinking mind, which is very close. It's almost, it's a little bit foggier, multi-tracked. You can only say one word at a time. I've tried to say 2 words at a time, and sometimes it's very humorous, but it's usually not effective. But you can think multiple things at the same time, or at least in such quick succession that it feels like it's the same time. So you can have like 8 thoughts going in your mind at once, but you can really only speak one of them. And so the speech tends to be a little bit more clear and a little bit more cognizant, a little bit more cogent. And the thinking mind can be more complicated, and it can hold more than you can say. It can be faster, but it can also be messier and harder to understand. And then behind that is your subconscious mind, and God knows what goes on in there, but some pretty fucking cool stuff comes out of it. And I feel like if you go back further and further, then you get to what, like, in the same direction. You're going from speech to the thinking mind to the subconscious mind, and then you go back further and further, and at some point, as you go along that spectrum, you hit the mind of God, the divine, the universal Akashic record, fucking infinite intelligence, whatever it is. If you go back from the thinking mind to the subconscious mind to further and further, then you end up at this thing that we could, for lack of a better term, we could call it the higher self. And so I think what these people do that are channeling is they sort of hold this concept of the higher self that holds them separate from that, and then they say, oh, but that I can be in alignment with, and that can speak through me. And then they allow the higher self to speak through them, and it's sort of like reaching around your elbow to get to your asshole, because in reality what you could do is you could just say, oh, I am that. I am the higher self, as well as this monkey meat body, but the whole thing is me. And there is no separation between it. I don't need it to speak through me. It is me. Like, we are we. We're one thing. And so you could just be. You can be divine. You don't need a connection to the divine. You're one thing. You can be it. You can be enlightened. That's another thought I had about enlightenment, by the way, this footnote. Thought I had about enlightenment the other day is like, enlightenment a lot of times is looked at as this attainment, like you graduate and then now you're enlightened. Like the Buddha finally sat on the tree and he got enlightened and that was it. Jesus was 12 and, he had his awakening, and then he confounded the scholars in the temple, and then from then on out he was enlightened. And no, I don't think that's right. I think that when we sit back here who haven't experienced enlightenment very much, look at somebody who experiences it all the time, and in the same way that if you take a cigarette at night and you spin it like this, it looks like a glowing circle. But it's not a glowing circle, it's a little point of light that just happens to trace that pattern enough that we see the pattern more than we see the individual point. And so in the same way, somebody who hits this sort of peak often enough ends up looking like a saint or a realized being or a Jesus or a Buddha. But you've been enlightened. Maybe just once or twice in your life, you've been enlightened. But it's like a sprint. And so, we're in a certain kind of shape. And so you go out and you sprint and you hit this certain speed of sprinting and you're like, oh my God, I'm sprinting. It's fantastic. And you don't go home and go, oh, well, I was sprinting before, but I'm not sprinting now. And for most of us, enlightenment is a sprint, and we can do it for a little while. And then you go back to walking, and it's fine. You're still moving. Or maybe you stop walking, you lay down and you go to sleep. Either way, that's just this little rabbit trail about what I think about enlightenment. I am just running into technical issues all over the place. So my final thought was about surrender, because there's a lot of spiritual teachings that teach surrender. And again, for surrender, you need separation. You need two. There has to be something to surrender to. And so seems like surrender and control and the higher self and channeling and all of this stuff is sort of loosely interconnected. It all seems like pieces to the puzzle. So there is I think like I like surrender. I kind of hold it as a paradox though, because there is this feeling that feels like surrender, that feels very good and turns out very productive. And when I surrender, it does feel like a current catches me and things come through me and I produce these things that are very good. But surrender is the wrong word. Because again, who are you surrendering to? You're it. You're it. If you're not it, there isn't any. So it's surrender in that, like, when you surrender, you stop fighting. But who it is that you're fighting has been yourself the entire time. And so all it is it's taking this, if you find yourself feeling like surrender would be a relief, then I think what has happened is that you have separated yourself from yourself conceptually, because it's not possible to literally separate yourself from yourself. The universe is just one thing, but you've conceptually separated yourself from yourself, and so and you're fighting yourself. And so who do you stop fighting is yourself. And so it's a surrender, but it's really a reunion. It's really two conceptually separated parts of yourself coming back into union with each other and working towards the same goal. Realistically, it's just reconnecting to the rest of yourself. And the part of you, I guess, the part that is smaller is the one that suffers when the separation happens. But I now that I say it out loud, I imagine the larger part suffers as well. And yet it doesn't seem that it does. It seems that the divine is full of ecstasy. So maybe all the suffering ends up on one side of the line. I don't know. There are many more questions. The universe is infinitely mysterious. We're never going to solve it all. And thank God, because my favorite thing is finding a little crack in reality and picking at it until I discover some neat new nugget. And so yeah, this is a little bit of a continuation of the last video on I think, at least in my mind, it ties together with the idea of intentionality versus winging it, planning versus winging it, and also, like, so if there is a sort of divine, ineffable plan that you should surrender to, well, who is it? Who is this God that made this plan? Well, it's you. But what do I know? I'm a trickster and a fool.